Hello, this is Fairly Secret Music. Gonna do another one quick after the last one. You can see that I have the same shirt on. I was watching a guy named Scott Walker talk about Dark Angel, and I just thought, okay, I'll start this video with kind of a shout out to Scott. That guy's got like 4,000 subscribers, but I just wanted to say Dark Angel was the one band that got me into death metal, so it's kind of appropriate that I talk about them at the beginning of this. I will agree with Scott. They did get better album from album. I only have the two because I really didn't like their original singer. I loved Ron Reinhardt though. And of course Gene Hoglan is an amazing drummer. I believe Scott said Leave Scars is his favorite. My favorite is Time Does Not Heal. The production was way better. Terry Date was the producer on this. These, I believe, are Russian copies. They have this licensed for sale only in Russian Federation. I don't know. These came in some of the coolest packaging I have ever gotten from eBay. It was fantastic. So, Leave Scars is just brutal, and the production is kind of muddy, but Older Than Time Itself and Never to Rise Again are just really catchy. The best songs on here are, to me, Promise of Agony and Leave Scars, the title track. This album, there's not a bad track on here. The only thing, and I believe Gene Hoglan has said, was all the songs were so damn long, and there are so many riffs on here. There was a sticker on the cassette that said, let me see how many songs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think it said 9 songs, 56 minutes of music, or no, 64 minutes of music, and 256 riffs. That was the sticker, or close to that. This album had a guy named Brett Erickson on it. He was from the band Viking. This is their second album, which was kind of weird because their singer had become a Christian, but he didn't want to leave the band, so he kind of just altered words to the lyrics. And Case of Stubborns is one of the coolest songs on this album. This is Viking, Man of Straw. I bring this out because it has direct relation to Dark Angel. The best songs on this album are, I think, Subtle Induction. Wait. Maybe. There's one song, I think it's the last song, and it starts out that's the song. That's one of my favorite songs on here. But Time Does Not Heal, Pain's Invention Madness, The New Priesthood, Psychosexuality. And if you listen to the lyrics on this album, and Ron, oh my God, he enunciated and made it so you could listen and hear every word, especially if you knew the lyrics. Psychosexuality is just a very, it is, what am I trying to say? It's a topic that not a lot of bands would tackle, and they did it really well. Same thing with Leave Scars. Leave Scars is all about leaving children alone. Don't leave scars on kids, and about pedophiles, and the death of innocence. At least that track is about, leave the children alone. Essentially death of innocence. Gene Hoglan wrote all the lyrics on these albums, and he was hitting on topics that no other metal band, and especially extreme metal bands, were doing at the time. You get later on, like Chuck in Death started talking about things outside of the whole blood and guts and whatever. None of these bands really that I'm going to feature in this stayed with the whole kind of like death metal subject matter that they would start with. So the first band I want to talk about is the first few bands, Obscura. This band got their name, I believe, from the album Obscura by Gorguts. And I have listened to all of these a few times, and honestly, not a lot of stuff sticks from these albums. They're really well played. Jean-Paul from Pestilence plays a 6-string fretless bass on the first 2 albums. I believe it was these 2. Then they got another bass player on this album, and they are good. I've just not listened to them at a point where I wanted to listen to them multiple times. And usually my rule is the same rule that Brian Latigre from the Thrash It Out podcast has, is listen to an album 3 times to really get into it before you form an opinion on it. Sometimes I don't need to do that. I try to follow that rule as much as I can. Another band who started out as a fairly straightforward death metal band is Pestilence. This is the 2 from the Vault version, and it has Consuming Impulse and Testimony of Ancients. And this band did not start with the bass player from who ended up being in Obscura. Let's see, what is his name? Jeroen Thesseling. I was thinking his name was Jean-Paul for some reason. He didn't get into the band until the album Spheres, and I believe they had a couple different bass players. On the Consuming Impulse, they had Martin Van Drunen, who was one of these guys. And then on the Consuming Impulse, they had Tony Choi, who went on to play, who was the original bass player for Cynic, who went on to play with Atheist. There was a lot of overlapping with band members at that time. So Testimony of Ancients is kind of where they start like pushing the envelope. They start incorporating more technical sound components. But then they get to Spheres, and this is where some of the guys are playing, synth guitars. I know Jeroen Thesseling, the bass player, he was playing a 6 and 4-string bass, and I believe he was playing fretless on this album. They also put out this best of through Metal Mind. I got this and this around the same time. It was before I had purchased this. I just figured, I think I got this one first, the best of first, before any of the other ones were available to me. They're pretty decent band. Newer stuff is a lot heavier. At one point, they I should keep this up here. At one point, they had the bass player from Obscura play with them in the U.S. because their bass player either left or couldn't make it. The next band this is the only album I owned by them. I've owned a few other ones. This is the most technical, and mainly the reason I own this is because of this guy, Steve DiGiorio. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name. I'll just call him Steve. He plays fretless bass. I'm a huge fan of fretless bass, especially with death metal. It just adds a different texture that other fretted bass players don't have, and it's fantastic. This one I'm not 100% familiar with. I got this along with a bunch of CDs, and I never really went back to it. I remember this was the one out of all the Sadist stuff that I really did like. The first really technical metal band that one of the really technical metal bands that I ever listened to was Atheist, and they had a guy named Roger Patterson who ended up unfortunately dying in a accident in their van on the way home. He really liked the bass player from Watchtower and said if anything ever happened to him that he couldn't record the bass parts for Unquestionable Presence, their follow-up album, that he would want the bass player from Watchtower. And I guess they did ask him, and the guy didn't really know anything about them and was like, no, I don't want to do that. And I believe he has said that he regrets not doing it. This is more straight ahead death metal, but with a bass player who is all over the place, and their drummer is really good. Not like Cynic style as much, but just really interesting death metal. The singer has a very unique voice. Sometimes I can't get into it. Sometimes I really like it. I think this is the album. This is the first album that I got of theirs, and this has probably the best stuff in my opinion. Like Mother Man and Unquestionable Presence. I remember listening to this on the bus on my way home from work, just thinking, whoa, these guys are crazy. And this is the first album. Tony Choi, who is right here, he left Cynic to be in Atheist. And I'm actually glad that he did, because I think he fit better with this band than he did with Cynic. He stays with Atheist through to this. Well, technically there's live stuff on here that he played on. Oh no, this is live at Wacken. I'm not 100% sure who plays bass on this. Let me see. But Atheist Elements, this album was kind of an experiment. I believe the guitarist / singer stopped playing guitar at this point because he has really bad tendonitis, and I believe they got another guitar player. There were kind of rules with what they wanted to do, and they tried to do this album with as little double bass drums as possible. So it's a really interesting album, and there are songs like Water, Air, Mineral, Fire, Earth, the elements, that are instrumental songs, kind of breaks in between songs. Unquestionable Presence live at Wacken, this does have Tony Choi on bass. I believe he was supposed to be in the band when they recorded the follow-up to Elements. Let's see, what year was this? Albums don't have years on them anymore. It's just weird. They don't have it. Well, Season of the Mist makes it really weird, because They do everything in Roman numerals, and I can never remember what means what. But Jupiter is the last album they came out with. I think they might have a live album after this. I'm not 100% sure. But this one was basically a return to kind of the Unquestionable Presence stuff, or that kind of style, heavier stuff. The singer just sings. They had two guitarists on this because of his hands. Original drummer, original singer, the other guitarist. It's an album that I didn't really listen to a lot because I was kind of disappointed at first with it, so I never really went back to it all that much. The next band is a Canadian band called Beyond Creation, and this band had one of the greatest bass players. His name is Dominique Forest Lapointe, and he plays 6-string fretless bass. Let me bring that guy. There are Beyond Creation videos where it has him playing along with the song, so you can hear the bass up front. And the best song is Omnipresent Perception, I believe it is. He does this part that he gets a bass solo, and he does this, and it is so melodic, and he is doing stuff that I've never seen other bass players, especially fretless bass players, doing. He'll play a chord and he'll slide the whole thing up, and it's just amazing. They have two singers in the band. Both guitarists sing or do the death metal growls. They are a little growly. Speaking of growly, my AC just went on. Sorry about that. And I am not really familiar with this album. I got this with a bunch of other albums and just have not given it a listen. This one is fantastic. There is melody. There is same with Obscura. They do have melodic parts, just like later Death and that Cynic Focus album, which I will get to. But their vocals are a little bit more guttural than I really like. Speaking of awesome vocals, though, Gorguts. Does anybody sing like Luc Lemay? I have no idea. I asked a friend of mine to do death metal vocals on one of my recordings, and he's like, well, what do you want them to sound like? And I said, like Luc Lemay, and he's like, shit, no. He is the hardest person to copy. This album was out on Roadrunner, considered dead. This was kind of, I don't want to say generic, but, kind of run-of-the-mill death metal. Erosion of Sanity ends up being their turning point. This is a fantastic death metal album. Metal Mickey, I know you like Earlier Death. If you have not heard Gorguts, Erosion of Sanity, do yourself a favor and listen to this, because it is unbelievably good. They had a pretty stable lineup with those two albums. Then they switched big time. They got a new let me see. I don't know. Let's see. Wow. Luc Lemay is the only person still in the band at this point. Let me see if the bass player is... Nope. Yeah, Luc Lemay is the only person. He got a new guy named Steve Hurdle on this album. This album is called Obscura. If you want a death metal album that absolutely makes you go, what the shit am I listening to? This is the album. And they played every song on this album live in Minneapolis in 1993, 95. God, I can't even remember what year I saw them. I saw them with Nile. No. I think Nile played, and then I think it was Cryptopsy, and then these guys. I went to see Gorguts because that was the only band I was into at the time. I have seen Nile, and yeah, I did see Cryptopsy. But these guys were the ones, they were headlining, and holy shit. Talk about guitars that are absolutely doing complete opposite of one another. This album is a headphone album if I've ever listened to one. There are new versions of this. I don't know if it's remastered, but it was out of print for a long time. I think this is the slip disc Olympic version that I have here. They followed this up with From Wisdom to Hate, and this album is a bit more reeled in, not as crazy as Obscura, but the title track has one of the coolest drum parts ever. I can't remember exactly who is on this album. Let me see. It's Luke LeMay, Daniel Mongrain, who now plays, I believe, with Voivod. He was also in a band called Martyr. Steve Colter was on bass, so I believe it's still the exact same bass player as Obscura. And a guy named Steve McDonald on drums. They switched drummers too. That guy, I believe, committed suicide, which is always just a shame. He was amazing. I remember seeing an ad of his in like a metal magazine where he was looking to find a new band when Gorguts stopped doing stuff after this. He was amazing. Listen to the title track. Yes, I'm saying amazing. This next band, this has a bass player and a drummer that I do not know of. This is a hard to find CD. This is basically like Obscura 2, Negativa. It's Luke LeMay and Steve Hurdle back together with a new drummer and a new bass player. There is a video for the song Chaos in Motion that you can watch. This only had 3 songs on it, and it is, again, just crazy shit. You know, he would do things where he's playing on the guitar and he's going just like, and it's so awesome. So long time goes by, and in like 2013, 2012 or something like that, let me see. Yep, 2013, Seasons of Mist put out Colored Sands. That was around the time that I stopped listening to metal for about 3 years. Unfortunately, I passed on going to see these guys play with Carcass. I really wish I would have gone now. This album is good. It was kind of not what I was expecting. Same with the follow-up EP, which is called Pleiades Dust, also on Season of the Mist, and this came out in 2016. The first time I listened to it, I passed on it, but then I found it used, and I thought, you know what, I'll give it a try, and it's decent. It is one really long, I think 26-minute song. Luke LeMay is still sounds as amazing as he did on Erosion of Sanity. His vocals are some of my favorite death metal vocals. If you want more stripped down stuff, as I said, Erosion of Sanity, Metal Mickey, you might like this. It's got a little bit of technicality to it, but not overboard. The next band, Cynic. You cannot talk about progressive death metal without talking about Cynic. This is their one album that they released when the original band, or mostly original band, was together. They released this, which is, I don't even know what this is called, Euroboric Forms. This is all their demos from 88, 89, 90, and 91. This is when Paul Misvadel, I'm not sure if I pronounced his name correctly, when he was singing the death metal stuff, he ruined or hurt his voice, so he had to start using this weird like vocoder type stuff on his voice. And they also had a guy named Tony Tigerin or something like that on Focus, and he did all the death metal stuff. They were supposed to record this album, then a storm hit Florida, and they had to wait like 2 or 3 months or something like that. So they reworked the songs, and they benefited by reworking those songs. Veil of Maya, I Am But a Wave 2, Euroboric Forms. How Could I has one of my favorite guitar solos ever. They mixed jazz kind of elements and Alan Holdsworth style playing. If you're not familiar with Alan Holdsworth, listen to Gong Gyazu, I think it's called. It's also known as Espresso 2. He was also on Tony Williams' Lifetime, I believe. And Bill Bruford's first couple CDs, One of a Kind. He also played with the band UK with John Wenton from King Crimson, and Eddie Jobson, who played with a lot of people. I believe he played with Frank Zappa at one point. Terry Bozzio ended up being the second drummer of that band. So this is where they stopped being a death metal band, or a progressive death metal band. They did this demo called Portal. They changed their name for some reason. No death metal vocals on here. This one is a little harder to get into. It has a lot of the technicality, but none of the aggressiveness. They came back in 2008 with Traced in Air, and this was a big letdown for me. I have since warmed to it, but yeah, it wasn't the same. They did an EP called Retraced, which was pretty decent. He does more clean singing on there without the effects on his voice. They have since done these two albums. This is called Carbon Base Anatomy, and then this one is called Kindly Bent to Free Us. After this album, the drummer and the guitarist had a falling out, and I have no idea what's going on with the band now, except for I believe the guitarist and the bass player are still doing stuff. They released one song, but I don't know the outcome of just that one song. I believe they're working on a new album. And you cannot talk about death metal without talking about death. Scream Bloody Gore, my least favorite death album. It really does nothing for me, but I'm a completist, so I own it. It's okay, I guess. I own this on cassette. It was the very first death metal album I ever bought. I had it for maybe a week and just despised it. I find it interesting now listening to it, but it's still my least favorite. Leprosy was kind of another step forward. I know people that are really into like old school classic death metal will gravitate towards this, and then Spiritual Healing. Spiritual Healing had a little bit of that technical stuff going for it. James Murphy was on here, which I believe every album James Murphy on benefits by having James Murphy. He left this band to then go play with. He was with. I want to say he was with Master. No, that was Jason Global from Cynic was with Master. Jason Global was amazing on that Cynic album, by the way. He was with Obituary and I believe Cancer, maybe. I can't remember. He's since played with Testament, and he had a band called Disincarnate that I talked to you about in one of my other videos. That was an amazing band too. This is really the turning point for Death as a band. He finally had a lineup that could play the stuff that he really wanted. It's Steve from Sadus on fretless bass, and it's Paul and Sean on guitar and drums from Cynic, and they brought the playing and the musicianship up 10 notches from Spiritual Healing, in my opinion. The production is amazing. Scott Burns did such a great job back then. I know there are a lot of people who said he was kind of like a cookie cutter. Every one of his albums sounded the same. But when you get that much separation and clarity in your recordings, why not? Why not? This album sounds amazing. This is the remixed version with demos and stuff on it. You can hear the fretless bass a lot better on this one. They kind of buried it a smidge. You could still hear it, but it wasn't as present as it is now on this. Their follow-up, oh my God, Individual Thought Patterns, has Gene Hogland, Steve DiGioro, Chuck, and God, what is his name? Andy LaRock from King Diamond. He just came in and did guitar solos, and I believe that's it. But what a lineup. The title track, Overactive Imagination, is one of the greatest Death songs ever, followed by In-Human Form. And just like Metal Mickey said, you can tell every damn word he says. You can't miss anything he says, because he sang with such clarity on these albums that it's something some death metal bands just do not have going for them. The album after that still had Gene Hoglan. They lost Steve. They lost Andy and the new guitarist and the new bass player were decent. He didn't play a fretless, which I was really disappointed. I did see them, I believe, on this tour. Let me see when this was recorded. Yeah, I did see them on this tour with Nevermore actually opening. And bit of trivia, if you like Death but want a singer that sounds more like a Jeff Tate or like a Nevermore type singer, they did an album called Controlled Denied, and this album has the last lineup basically of Death minus the bass player and adding a singer. They switched up the bass player with Steve again, so it is amazing. And but with melodic singing over it. Back to Symbolic. Great tour. They played really, really well. Those guys still could play all those other parts. Just kind of a disappointment, because I really liked Steve. But Gene Hoglan still at the top of his game at this point. By this time in, I believe, 98, he had switched up the lineup again. Gene Hoglan was playing in Strapping Young Lad at this time, and he got a guy by the name of Richard Christie on drums. You had Shannon Ham on guitar and Scott Scott Clendenin on bass. Scott was actually kicked out of the Controlled Denied project, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know what happened there. These guys did a live in LA Death and Raw show that was released, I believe, after Chuck died. I believe Chuck died in early 2000 or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. This is a great album. One of the weird things about this album is they end it with a cover of Painkiller that Chuck sings, and he does it pretty decently. That's the kind of vocals he really kind of wished he sang in. But he used his vocals in a way that I don't think a lot of other death metal singers have done. And he always talked about subjects that weren't just, Cannibal Corpse-y, deathy kind of vocals or lyrics. It was always a subject that made you think, and he was awesome. It's a shame that he had to pass away so young and with so much potential, because apparently they were going to do another Controlled Deny album. So this one, the only bad thing about this album is I really hate Richard Christie's China cymbal sounds. So I want to keep these videos down in length. Hopefully this wasn't too long. I never know until I hit done and save or whatever. So let me know what you think. Tell me what you think about the length of these videos, and if they keep your interest. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.